Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, adventurers. It's time to take off your boots and give those wandering feet a rest. Sit down and make yourself comfortable. It's time for a little Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And in today's episode, we're going to do something a little different and flip the coin with a couple of stories that reflect on ways that progress has caused frustration to the point where people are going back a step in the way they do things. A little de-gadgetizing, if you will. And hopefully that won't be the case with quantum computing. We'll do a check-in to see where they're up to on that front. And we'll talk about how we're getting much cleverer in the gathering and storing of energy. Batteries and solar panel technologies are always on the improve, of course. But without any further ado, please welcome to the microphone Matthew Dickerson. Take your shoes off and say hello to the people, please.
Hello to the people. I was waiting for some cheers or something to happen there as well.
Well, I can hear them in the background, but I don't know if they're coming through the microphone.
No, probably not. No, they're very loud in the background, weren't they? Now, I've had a very interesting week, but one of the cool things I got to look at, and they wouldn't let me play with it, but I got to look at it, was another VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing machine.
Very cool.
This is one that I've looked at before when it was tethered. So they had a very short couple of wire ropes on it, and that allowed it to take off just a little bit and then hover just above the ground in case something went wrong. It couldn't go very far. But they've got their next prototype now, and the next prototype is ready to take to the air. Not with a person inside it.
Right.
Remote controlled. But this particular, and I can't mention the name or the location of this, but this particular VTOL is a little bit different in that it takes off vertically. So there's 8 propellers, and it's like a drone takes off vertically.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there much difference to being a drone? Yeah.
Well, you think that's the case, but then once it gets up and starts flying, it can get to about 100 knots, and then the propellers and the wings tilt 90 degrees, so they're now like a fixed-wing aircraft.
Right.
So now, instead of using lots of energy, like a drone does, in keeping it up, and then a bit of energy to move forward, then like an aeroplane, it's using the wing to actually keep it up in the air as it moves through the air.
Right.
So the idea is you've still got that wonderful ability to go up and down on the same spot, take off in, say, for example, a medical retrieval or land on a hospital. So you've got that ability to go right to where you need to be, but then rather than use up lots of energy while you're flying, you tilt the wings, tilt the propellers, and away it goes. Listen,
and so, I'm just interested about the scale of this. Is it large enough to have a couple of people in it?
It's large enough. This particular one had lots of equipment in it, so the cabin was filled with equipment. But if you imagine a pod in the middle and then the wings and propellers went across the front in both sides, so 2 propellers on each side, and then behind the cabin across the back with the propellers and wings on that side. So it would fly as if you've got a wing at the top behind you and then a wing low at the front.
Gotcha.
And once it gets into the next stage, it would fit a pilot and probably a medical staff member, a medical personnel, and a patient. So it might be, say, 3 people, but of course there'll be other uses. They've got a contract to deliver these from a medical perspective, medical retrieval, but there'll also be uses there for taxis, that type of thing. So it would probably be a 4-person taxi, maybe autonomous at some stage in the near future.
Wow.
But what I really like about it is that ability to keep flying horizontally without using a heap of power to stay up. Now,
so these might replace helicopters, perhaps.
Well, it's got the advantage of a helicopter going up and down, but certainly more efficient because a lot of that energy for a helicopter is staying up in the air. Safe as well because it's got the ability to glide a bit. So below 100 knots, I don't know if it keeps gliding or becomes just a dead weight then, but it can glide a bit without power. But even just the technology in it, the motors themselves have got an inverter on the motor. So they've got AC power that's coming in and then an inverter to change them back to DC power for the motor. Or that might have been vice versa. Actually, I can't remember which way it goes now. It might have been.
So if it's on a battery, that'd be DC.
Yeah, it might have been the other way around,
so
actually.
AC,
yeah, and then taking that to AC for the motor. The batteries themselves are in the side pods, but they also are looking at hydrogen powered. So this is probably one of maybe 100 different aircraft around the world that are being developed to be able to do this type of thing. So
amazing.
It's pretty exciting and pretty exciting seeing it in operation. But again, you'll see this being flown from the ground before they finally put someone in it. Obviously, from a safety perspective, not having someone in there makes it safer, but it won't be that far away. They'll actually have someone in it and flying this thing.
Wow, that's
Very
amazing.
cool.
All right, well, let's get cracking with our first story. Another resurrection of some very old tech. Now, we've talked on this program in previous episodes about how vinyl records are making something of a comeback, but try this on for size, folks. When was the last time you really listened to AM radio? AM radio, Matt? Really? No doubt you've got some stats here that are going to blow my mind about how things have changed for AM radio.
AM radio used to be incredibly popular.
It
obviously, when radio first came out, and we're talking about the beginning of the 1920s, probably 1920s, I think AM radio came out. So that would have been the only option you had. And by the 1930s, they started to get AM radios in cars. Not many, it was a bit flash. Cadillac had an AM radio. That's right. And I can still remember that my brother, and I'm talking about probably the 70s here, maybe early 80s, he got a car and it was a bit of a flash purchase because he went and bought a cassette radio to install in the car. So it didn't come with it. There probably wasn't even much of a spot to put it, but wow, you've got a flash radio and it had push buttons on there to change channels.
Well, our family car all through the 80s never had a stereo with a cassette player.
Right. Had a radio though.
Had a radio, but, we did a lot of driving across the Hay Plain. And so, the AM radio was the only one that didn't really cut out across the Hay Plain, but you, of course, had a very limited selection about what sort of programs you're listening to.
Limited selection, because you go forward to the 80s and FM really took over from AM, especially when it came to music. And, of course, the difference there is that AM amplitude modulation modulates the frequency, modulates the amplitude of the signal to get the signal that you're getting, so you're listening to. So the quality of that isn't great, and the ability to be interfered with in terms of other things like static will give you some sort of interference. FM, frequency modulation, modulated the frequency, so that gave you better quality and less prone to interference. What various car manufacturers are saying now is that they don't want to have AM radio in their modern cars, in particular EVs, because of all the modern electronics in there, it's creating some electromagnetic interference.
Oh, really?
So, well, the solution there is we could shield it and spend more money on something no one's going to listen to or get rid of it. But there are 4,000 AM radio stations in the US alone. So if you get rid of it out of all these cars, and let's face it, the car is probably the last bastion of the radio, because you can't watch a streaming service, you can't read a newspaper, but you can listen to the radio. I mean, you can listen to a podcast like Tech Talk, for example. You can listen to things beside the radio, but the radio is pretty convenient. You jump in, flick the radio on, that's pretty convenient.
I wonder if it's cheaper to run AM radio as well, because it's lower frequency, of course. It can travel further. You can bounce, so you don't need as many relay stations. You can bounce it off the ionosphere and whatnot. So there's advantages to AM radio, definitely.
Well, absolutely. And that one thing you talk about as an advantage is that length. So it's a lower frequency, longer wavelength, therefore it's going to get further. So if you're in a regional area, that would be a preferable thing to do.
Yeah, it's good at bending around mountains and things like that. But, it also bounces off the ionosphere, so that's the big advantage.
So it does give you that added advantage. So at the moment in the US, Congress is debating as we speak, right this very second, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, they're debating an act. And I thought it was just Aussies that did this, but it's really humans, I think. They come up with pretty obvious names for things that we're doing. I often joke that Shark Bay, hey, there's some sharks in a bay. What are we going to call that? Even the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's in Sydney. It's a bridge across the harbour. What could we call that? Well, anyone got any ideas? And the best we could come up with Sydney Harbour Bridge. So they've got an act they're debating at the moment called the AM Radio for Every Vehicle Act. So it's pretty obvious what that act is all about. They want to make sure that every new vehicle that's sold in the US has to have AM radio. Now, already we know that Teslas don't. We know some of the new Ford EVs don't. So that's going to be a bit of a pain for those manufacturers if they've got to add AM radio. Presumably they've got to do a bit of shielding as well. But the other thing I thought about was it's probably the aesthetics. In the old AM radio days, you had the stick antenna that would come up. The flash cars came up automatically. The rest of us had to pull the antenna up. And, of course, when they got knocked off by a bird or someone, you're coating it. That's right. You stuck a coating it because you just needed something that could grab that fairly long wavelength and pick it up in some way. With FM radio in your car, you've got the little shark fin on the back of some cars, or it's built into the windscreen or the rear window of some cars. You don't need that long piece of metal to pick up that radio signal. So if you've got an AM radio, do we need to go back to that old-fashioned stick antenna that's stuck up there, or do you just assume it's just not going to be very good reception? So they're looking at that.
Forcing all these people to have something that they neither want nor really need.
Well, that you're being a bit presumptuous there, James. Maybe some
if you
people
really
do
want to listen to AM radio, you can always buy one of those transistor radios. They must be at the $2 shops these days.
That's right.
And then just put that on your dashboard.
Well, you go to the cricket, and that's one of the things they often give you. When you walk in, there'll be so many at the beginning of the day, they'll have these little radios, which are little AM radios you just clip onto your ear. So you're right. I don't think they're worth that much money if you really want to listen to AM radio. But I think part of this as well, I'm going to make
used to make crystal radio sets.
Yeah, true. I'm going to make an ageist comment here. I think US Congress, and I don't have data to back me up on this, the average age of people in US Congress is probably a bit older. So maybe they like listening to AM. Maybe they haven't discovered FM. Or maybe the talkback is on AM, so they want to listen to some of the political talkback. So maybe there's a self-interest here. I'm not sure. But if it happens in America, maybe those car manufacturers say, well, we've put it in those cars, we sell it in America. What the heck, we'll just leave it in every car we sell now. So it might come to the nearest car lot near you where you'll now have AM radio again.
And you'll have to pay a little bit more to accommodate the AM radio. Well, how about this for a backflip, folks? Hands up, who among us were operating on the understanding that changing your passwords regularly was a vital step in the right direction for enhanced internet security? Me too. Matt, you're about to tell us that just exactly why this is not working out for us.
We've got it wrong. Apparently, all these things that I've been saying for a long time as well are all apparently wrong. The US National Institute of Standards and Technology has issued new guidelines on password management, and they say don't periodically require your users to change passwords. And I know when I've set up networks, I'd put in a rule every 30 days, every 45 days, whatever it might have been, you've got to change your password, and you can't go back and keep recycling old passwords. You can't flip between two different passwords, so you've got to do that. But after decades of research, what it's shown is that when you do that, when you force people to change passwords, people struggle with a new password. So then they just go, I can't think of a new one. I'll just go password 1. Yeah. And then next time they'll go, I won't let me have password 2 because it's too similar. I'll just go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and put a letter at the end and that's it. So you end up coming up with an easy password. So the solution now is to say, don't make people change their passwords on a regular basis. So it does seem somewhat counterintuitive.
Someone's going to have to tell the IT department at my work.
That's right, at every work, James. Now, the problem here is, of course, that if you do have a breach or someone learns your password or you're worried about it, absolutely change it because you've thought about it. And typically when you've got a periodic change, it says you've got 5 days before you've got to change your password. Oh, good, I'll get around to that. 4 days, 3, 1 day, you've got to change your password now. I've got to get in. So you just do come up with something on the spot without thinking about it. Now,
Substandard.
It is. I still like the idea of a mnemonic if you are trying to come up with a password. So, for example,
100%.
You might say lowercase I, uppercase L, TTT, EW at 9. And you think, well, that's not an obvious run of characters. It's not a word. How do I remember that? But that's actually, I listen to Tech Talk each week at 9. Of course, we launch our episodes at 9 o'clock each Monday morning. So something like that, if you just take the first letter of each of those, make sure there's a special character at 9, for example, a number in there, a lowercase one, then suddenly you've got a difficult to guess password, a password that's not a dictionary word, so it can't be hacked easy from a dictionary attack, just a jumble of characters. And you can have a pretty long password without having to try and remember this really long password because you can just have a long mnemonic, whether it be 8, 10, 15 characters, whatever it might be.
And for me, where I regularly log into a password onto a computer, on a big screen with an audience, and if I'm in a hurry, I've been known to forget to put in my login and just go straight to the password. And I've had people say, "Sir, you've mashed the keyboard again. What's happened there?" And it's because I've got a mnemonic that's got the alphanumeric characters in it as well.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah,
If the kids haven't, hopefully the kids aren't listening to this, but if the kids haven't picked up on the fact that was actually your password
even
on
if
screen,
they don't, even if they do see it, they're not going to remember it because it's got no logical sequence for them.
Yeah, no, you're spot on.
And so it's just 8, 9, 10, maybe a dozen characters that are just completely randomised. That's good. And so, if it was a word, then they would remember it.
Yeah, that's right. If up on the screen came
Yep.
James Eddy,
Even
then
if it
you'd
was
go,
pink bananas or whatever, you're going to remember that really easy.
Yeah, that's right. So this research has come out of the University of Surrey. Seems the opposite of what we all think, but I do understand the logic of it. I understand when you make people change the password, when it's not convenient for them to change the password, you do that. Or they also talk about in this that you get people who do the classic write it down on a Post-it note and stick it on the monitor. So they've got it there because I had to change that password and I can't remember this new one.
Yep.
And anyone else walks along there, they go, oh, what's this jumble of characters? Oh, I think I might use that to get into James's computer. So it's quite fascinating, but that's the latest advice. Two-factor authentication is obviously important as well.
Yep.
That makes it much harder to get into anything, whether that be two-factor with email or two-factor with a phone number, like a text message, whatever way you do it, it's absolutely worthwhile.
Oh, I got caught out with eBay just recently. I made a purchase. They couldn't deliver it, so I needed to get in contact with them, but they required me to log on. Now, I hadn't I registered with eBay ages and ages ago, and the only phone number I gave them was a landline number. That's how long ago it was. And so I don't have that number anymore. I went to change it, but I couldn't get on because the two-factor authentication is to the landline number. I don't know. We'll have to talk about this afterwards. And
That's right.
I'll get out of trouble.
That sounds like a little round robin. You've got to go around there, around in circles.
I guess I'm not getting that parcel delivered. Now, keeping with the theme of turning back the clock on progress, have you ever found yourself getting really frustrated with a gadget that was supposed to make life easier, but ended up just causing more fuss and or waste? Can you remember a time when a much less fancy solution got the job done just as well as the new fancy gadget was supposed to? I bet you've got a list of them. Matt, sometimes newfangled gadgetry just gets in the way.
I hate to say this, but sometimes we have technology for the sake of technology. We do get things that are over-engineered. We do get things that we go, wow, that's pretty cool, and let's see the practical application of that.
What was the real purpose of it?
That's right. And I read a story about a guy who was absolutely frustrated, putting his hair out, trying to flush the toilet. It was a sensor toilet, so he's waving his hands, he's doing gestures, he's dancing around, whatever. He had a deposit that he didn't want other people to see in there, so he didn't want to walk out and leave it. And he was putting his hair out just going, if I could just press a button, surely that's okay. And when you think about it, I think a lot of those sensor toilets came in during COVID when we shouldn't be touching anything. But when you go to the toilet, you typically wash your hands. COVID or not, you're washing your hands. So touching a toilet to flush the toilet is probably okay for the 5 seconds and from the time you walk out of the toilet to when you actually wash your hands and all those germs are hopefully washed away. So putting all that technology on a toilet, and I've had the same experience. It wasn't so much in the toilet, but when I came out to wash my hand, I was doing the wave under, looking at it, and then I realised there was a big knob on top that I had to just push down, and there we go, I had water coming out. That's a bit old-fashioned. I was expecting something that was highly over-engineered, some sort of gizmo, some sort of gadget. Sometimes we do see things where they're put in place because someone's just playing with technology because they can.
Yeah.
Some people have asked me why the Tesla dance occurs, why you can set your Tesla to do a little song and wind windows down and up.
Because we can.
Exactly right. I am convinced that Elon Musk or someone said, we could do this, Why? Because we can. Why not? So sometimes you get that in technology. There are times, though, when you do something because you can, and then it leads to other advances. So the toilet, for example, you might go, let's do gestures, whatever, but then you get to the point where you get someone that might have multiple sclerosis, low strength in their arms and low ability to press a button, but they can wave their hand in front of it. So it might have other applications. That's just a random thing I thought of, but it might have other applications when you do engineer these things to the wazoo to get to the point where, look at all these cool things it does, but you don't really need it to do it that way. So I'm not advocating that we don't keep doing it, but I do understand the story caught my eye as a funny little experience where someone thought that some sort of technology was going to solve the problem, but they just couldn't work out how to flush the
Oh, look,
toilet.
and I know that I've been frustrated in other situations. None of them come to mind right now, though. But, we sometimes just realise that something's been over-engineered.
And what do you do when the toilet doesn't flush? Do you ring the IT department and you say, can you come and see me in cubicle 7 because I've got a bit of a problem? Mate, that's not my job. I'm in IT. Yeah, I know, but surely this is your problem to solve.
I'm sure Mr. Bean's got a solution that he would have used.
There's a skip there somewhere, isn't there?
Absolutely, there is. Now, quantum computing may just be the next major step in the development of technology. It may even herald a new age of civilization. There are still a few creases to iron out in quantum computing, though, and some of the major inroads are likely to happen within our shores right here in Australia. Matt, is this what it feels like to be a guinea pig?
I'm just wondering whether it's a bit like the Simpsons monorail where this California company has said to the Queensland government...
Haverbrook monorail. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
That's the one. And they said, we can sell you a quantum computer. And the Queensland government said, wow, we could be the first to have a quantum computer.
Yeah.
So let's do it. So they're spending $1 billion. So they're
Wow.
not throwing just a few coins at it, but you think they're pretty serious about it from that perspective. And I'll just go back one step. Quantum computing, the way I have explained quantum computing in the past is that most people understand that a computer works on ones and zeros, or ones or zeros. So you've got a one
Opening a
or a
gate
zero.
and closing a gate.
That's right. And you put enough of those gates together, you can form letters and numbers, and then you can do calculations and all sorts of wonderful things. So that's the way a normal computer would do. So if you flip a coin in the air, assuming you're on a flat surface, not having cracks in the ground, that coin's going to land as a 1 or a 0. So it will be one state or the other. The way I like to think of a quantum computer is when I flip the coin in the air, it's 1 and 0 at the same time. And that's what a quantum computer is. It's a 1 and a 0 at the same time, which means that a quantum computer can be incredibly powerful if you can harness the power and make it useful. And that's the critical part. So the Queensland government's got $1 billion they're spending on a quantum computer. They're building it near the Brisbane airport. About 3 years before it'll be ready, so not ready to go quite yet. But they're saying it will be the world's first useful quantum computer, first practical quantum computer.
Right.
Because they're building quantum computers now, but trying to get them practical and
They're
useful.
mostly just for research
That's right.
to work out how we can get them to work effectively.
That's exactly it. Now, the power of this is incredible. So they're talking about if we can get this right, if we can get this quantum computer working, it'll be much more powerful than any supercomputer on the planet at the moment. So what do you do when you've got all this power? Well, then you can start to do things like develop new drugs because you can do simulations. You can do modelling on those new drugs, what that might do in the human system. Climate modelling, obviously, we make one change over here, and what does that do to the planet in 20 years' time? There's some pretty serious modelling calculations that have got to go on to get to that sort of outcome. You could probably look at new batteries, new battery chemicals. So anything that involves something that's complex and you want to try different things, that's where a quantum computer or a supercomputer for that matter can be incredibly useful. So will we be using this? Will this be something that will be useful in the world, some practical outcomes? I hope so, but just because they're still so experimental, I'm not sure. One thing that's fascinating, I think, about it is that for them to get this to work, you need a pretty big area, so probably a hangar, and you need some cryogenic freezers. So you've got things that are running near absolute zero, near negative 270 degrees Celsius. So you need to keep it that
They
cold.
run pretty hot.
Yeah, well, that's all to maintain the stability of the quantum system itself.
Yeah, right.
It's not just something you go, yep, I understand electronics, I understand electricity, and I understand computers. We can put that together. It's a whole other thing. It's something that you're almost dreaming up. I imagine Einstein, when he was dreaming up the theory of relativity, but he couldn't prove it. It wasn't until 70 or 80 years later that it was proven. He just had a thought experiment. And I kind of feel like that with quantum computers. I know, we could think about this, but then to actually do it, to build it, wow. So if it happens, fantastic. I'm a little bit skeptical that we're going to get there in 3 years' time, but I'm very happy to be proven completely
Well, I know
wrong.
a lot of the a lot of the work on quantum computers has been done. I know New South Wales universities have been a major centre. I've got to be careful here about mentioning too many places, but there's been some big work on quantum computing happening already on the shores. The fact that we're going to have the first one, first workable one.
Yeah, first useful one, I think is what they're calling it. So the first useful quantum computer, and then you would argue what is useful is just having a quantum computer that does something, can find my Wordle solution. Is that good enough use for a quantum computer? I'm not sure.
$1 billion to get the solution to Wordle?
That's right, and beat my neighbour. So.
Now, in recent months, we've reported on several new developments in battery technology. Let's start with the solid-state sulfur-selenium batteries. Now, there's some alliteration for you. And there's also the carbon fibre batteries that may provide some radical changes on how electricity is stored in many domestic and industrial scenarios. Well, one more option to the list now, people. 2024 has been a big year in batteries, of course. This one is coming from the McGill University in Montreal. Matt, this development is more of a souped-up version of the old lithium-ion option.
It is, and I love that one we talked about last week with the carbon fibre battery, using it as part of the structure. I think that's fantastic. And we've talked about it before. We are very much at the beginning of battery technology. There's so much to happen, so much development to occur. In this particular...
Yeah, so the carbon fibre was, you could actually build it into the structure itself.
Yeah, so the battery became part of the structure, so you didn't need to have a separate battery. So the energy density wasn't great of that one. I think from memory it was around about 20 or maybe 50 watt hours per kilogram of storage, whereas a normal battery might be, say, 250 or thereabouts. So
with this lithium-ion technology, we've already got something that we know is very good.
Yeah.
However, there's some people who have got some phobia about how unsafe it is, among other things.
So the idea here is that there's a lot of talk about solid-state lithium batteries. Now, when you talk about solid-state, you get a battery that is safer, better energy density, less likely to have a fire. In fact, I think it's very fire resistant. So lots of advantages. But when you've got a solid state battery, the issue has been the resistance. So the energy output in the past has been reduced. So a lot of people say, oh, yes, well, once they get solid state nailed, that'll be the time I'll buy an EV. Another one of those excuses that people come up with. But they are some way away, I think, from getting that solid state that's going to be as good at the moment as a battery that you might have in an EV today. But in this one, they've used a ceramic, but they haven't just used a normal ceramic, because you think of a ceramic, well, what's going to pass through a ceramic? Not much. A ceramic's a pretty good insulator. So if you want less resistance, that doesn't sound like a great solution. So the first thing I thought of was, how would you use a ceramic in a solid-state battery? But they've created a porous ceramic membrane, so that porous ceramic can allow transmission, if you like, through that ceramic, so not like a normal ceramic that would stop everything. So you're kind of getting a bit of the flow that you need without having the total flow that you might want. So again, getting inside and looking at what these batteries are and how they're put together, and then the advantages of them, absolutely fantastic. But I am convinced that we will nail it with solid-state batteries. The flammability, actually, interesting question for you. What's the difference between flammable and inflammable? Is there a difference?
Same. For all I know, they're the same.
It sounds like the same to me. So
I've got the same question. I've asked it many times myself.
Yeah, right. So a liquid electrolyte battery is flammable and inflammable, so it's both. But this is where we're trying to reduce that, and that's why I'm convinced that solid-state batteries will be a solution, because I think there is that one risk factor. It's not a big risk factor. There are more, on a per-car basis across the world, there are more fires in petrol cars than there are in EVs. But still, people have that fear, because the problem when you have an EV fire, when it starts, it keeps going. It burns hot and it keeps going. Whereas a petrol fire, you might have a bit of a chance of putting it out. But I think this, again, is just one of those other things. We'll see better driver ranges, like longer driving ranges, better charging times, better energy storage per kilogram. So lots of advantages if they can get solid state nailed. And this ceramic might be not the solution, but it might be another step along the path to the solution.
There's just so many people who are thinking about this, so many problem solvers that are working on it. It's just such an exciting area of science right now.
You feel like it's got to be solved one day, because there's so many people working on different solutions. And unlike 150 years ago, when people would be working on independent solutions and not even realise what someone was doing in another university just down the road or across the other side of the planet, there is so much information shared now that I think we develop these solutions much quicker.
Yeah, and while I'm not part of the team, I don't know all the problems that are a part of it. Humans are just very good at this sort of stuff. Yeah. We solve problems.
We do. We're good at solving problems.
The lowlifes of the scamming game are constantly working new angles to catch people off guard. The internet has become something of like a Victorian-era London, where the streets are littered with millions of little urchins of various disguises, constantly trying to lure us into a ruse and relieve us of our purses at every instant, every click of a button. Staying vigilant in our use of the internet can be really exhausting. Matt, the latest low-down dirty scheme now involves targeted advertisements.
And we think targeted advertisements are a bit annoying, maybe sometimes useful, but we've talked about it before.
Mostly annoying.
Mostly annoying. You go and search for something, and then for the next month you see that same product or that range of products coming up. I want to be able to click a button somewhere that says, I've made the purchase. So I'm looking for orange hats, and I've now bought my orange hat, so don't send me any more ads for orange hats. But eventually it gets sick of me looking at different ads and it goes away. But that real-time bidding, which is what we're talking about there, that real-time bidding is being used by scammers, because with real-time bidding, when it looks that someone searched for something or they've taken certain actions, then I can give them ads, but I can also give them scams. So if I see someone has been searching for something and I think they might have ordered something, now might be the time to send them through some Australia Post scams, because I'm pretty sure this person might have just about ordered something, so they're expecting something to come through. They're expecting a parcel to come. Therefore, they might fall for this Australia Post scam. Or I've noticed that person's doing some searching on some holidays, some driving holidays. Now might be the time to hit them with a toll scam, because they probably are driving through a toll somewhere on their trip. So let's go and hit them with that particular one. So it's becoming an issue. Again, you say it's a bit annoying. I think it is when it's just ads for a product that you might be looking at. But when it starts to get to the point where it's really targeting you, because you're susceptible. When you've ordered something and a day later you get something coming through saying you need to click on this link to get that parcel. Oh, good. It's turned up. Fantastic. I'll click on that link.
Yep.
You're just at that little bit of vulnerability. And I read one fascinating story about a gentleman who's a lawyer who almost fell for this. And it was only because he's a grumpy old man, as he put it, not my words, his words, that he didn't actually fall for it, because he'd actually been on a trip. He'd been researching a holiday. He'd been on the trip. He got the classic toll scam. And, of course, his first thought was, I know, that's a scam. But then he looked at it and went, oh, no, I think that's legitimate. And he went through the process to the point where he's about to pay the money for the scam, but it came up and it had one particular bank that was the bank you had to use to submit your money. And he thought, that's just wrong. The government doing tolls should be used. So he actually rang up to complain about this, to say how bad it was that it was just one bank. And they went, no, that's not us, sir. And he went, being a grumpy old man saved me. So he said, if I just had paid the money like I was about to do, I would have realised a few weeks later that it was actually a scam. But because I wanted to complain about it and locked into one bank, how bad was that? So this is a major problem. Real-time bidding is fantastic if you talk to people who sell products online, because they can really target those ads and spend less money on their advertising. And online advertising is relatively cheap. And because it is targeted, you know that you're getting better value for money. In the old days, you put an ad on the radio or on the TV or on a newspaper and your sales went up and you went, it was, oh, good, that ad worked. But did it work? Did it just happen to be that some extra people needed your product that day? Or did they see that ad? Or was it word of mouth down at the pub? Who knows what it was? With the targeted ads, you're getting a much better hit rate there. So they're great, but the big issue is just how much data we're sending and what that's being used for. One system said that the average Aussie submits data upload to various organisations about 449 times a day. Just by what you're doing, what you're clicking on, what you're just scrolling through Facebook, whatever you're doing, just pausing on that Facebook ad just for a little bit longer, more information goes off. So with all that data, it kind of makes sense that someone's going to take advantage of it.
Yeah. Photovoltaic solar panels perform best when exposed to wavelengths of light between 600 and 700 nanometers. Now, there's something you probably didn't know. Well, it's between the yellow and red wavelengths mainly. Now, infrared wavelengths, that is the radiant heat waves, are much longer than that. They're about 750 to 1 million nanometers long. Now, the trouble is, for solar panels, heat waves are not only not useful, but they can be downright counterproductive. No surprises then that the Saudis have come up with a very energy efficient way to keep their solar panels cool and efficient on hot summer days, Matt.
It is quite clever, and you're right. People think, oh, that's good. My solar panels are out in the sun, so I'm getting lots of power at the moment. But again, the temperature of that is critical. Now, in places where we might be in Australia, for example, many solar panels have just got a gap underneath the solar panel between the panel and the roof, and you get a bit of circulation of air, and that might keep them cool enough. But some days, I'm sure it isn't. But in Saudi Arabia, then it's a bit more of an issue, given the fact that solar power constitutes about 80% of Saudi's renewable energy production. So not all their energy, but all their renewable energy, 80% of it. So you can imagine in Saudi Arabia, there's a lot of sun. Let's go and stick some solar panels up. But there's a lot of heat as well. So what typically has happened in the past is they've used cooling systems to cool down the solar panels, but they're using electricity to cool down the solar panels to try and generate more electricity. So you're chewing up some of what you want to be able to be producing. But it's obviously been worth it to actually get to the point where you're keeping those solar panels a bit cooler. So now there's an international team that's been working on a better solution, which is passively collecting some atmospheric water and using that to actually cool the solar cells so that you can do it without having any electricity, use gravity to actually have that water running down the solar panels, and obviously evaporation.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Crazy idea. Yeah, and you think, well, hold on, not much atmospheric water, so surely it's going to be pretty useless. But
Well, yeah, we're talking about desert sort of areas. Yeah.
we are, but still there's a lot of moisture in the air that we don't realise, we don't think about. We think we've got high humidity when we get, say, 80 or 90%. We might think it's very dry when it might be, say, 20 or 30%. It is dry at 20 or 30%, but there's still moisture in the air, and that's exactly what they're taking advantage of here. So quite a clever system. I'm not sure whether you would use it in every application. If you just had solar panels on your roof, whether you say, let's go and use it in this system as well, or if it's really only applicable, the extra money you would pay to get this system to add on, whether it's only applicable in areas that have got extreme heat. So is it worth it in Australia? In most places, probably not. But if you're in an area in Australia that's got extreme heat, then, yeah, maybe not a bad idea.
But it'll also get people thinking about other solutions for the same problem that are energy efficient as well. And I just like the way that this idea seems to have come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Sorry, not inferring that Saudi Arabia is nowhere, but it's come out of the blue, and now other people are going to be thinking about other solutions or ways we can improve that solution.
Yeah, that's right. And they use a lubricant on the panels to make sure the water just keeps running off. So they've thought about things, and they've said this is a solution to keep them cooler.
And that water can be gathered at the bottom too, I would assume.
That's right. And then the early results so far, and this is only very early days, but they're getting extra power production, so probably about a 10% increase in power, and obviously no loss of power because they don't use power to actually run the whole system. So, yeah, very clever system.
This next story sounds like it comes straight out of a 60s sci-fi movie. Phonon lasers output highly directed sound as opposed to the light rays that are characteristic of photon lasers. Now, while the idea has been around since the 1930s, the reason you haven't heard of a phonon laser is because up until now, they haven't had much purpose. Matt, the Chinese have developed the most powerful phonon laser ever. Or, to be more accurate, we should call it actually a phonon saser.
Well, that's right. I think
because laser is light amplitude. Right. Yeah, okay. And so, yeah, this is sound.
I get the feeling that you like the word phonon. You put enough emphasis on that.
Well, you have to because it's not a common word. We talk about photons, in science. We don't talk about phonons very much.
Yeah, so that's your challenge next day at school.
Yeah,
talk
right.
to kids, just get them to occasionally drop in phonon into a sentence. But it is fascinating. The concept with a laser obviously is to concentrate that light and give you a very direct beam. And so the concept is the same, but with sound waves. And so why do we care? Why do we want to concentrate those phonons? Why do we want to concentrate the sound and do something with that? Well, there's a few reasons we might want to do that. For a start, we can get better accuracy of things like medical imaging. So when we've got a larger or a broader spectrum of sound, you're getting a reflection back of that sound. And so you can make out various things like an ultrasound. You can make out various things. Most people have seen, say, an ultrasound of a baby when someone's partner's pregnant, and so you can see that, but it's not. You can't make out. Oh, it just looks like he's going to have a big nose. This kid, doesn't he? It's a fairly broad image there.
Well, highly directed and highly high frequency sounds. Some of it will reflect off, but some of it will also pass through the medium to then reflect off another barrier, another boundary between two different media, let's say. So that's a really cool thing that light, I don't think light does do.
No.
That sound can travel through media as well as reflect off those surfaces too. And a little bit goes through and a little bit reflects off.
That's right. So what they do with this is saying the first thing we'll do is use it for medical imaging, but also things like being out in the ocean and looking at things on the ocean floor. Again, we've seen images of the Titanic or various things when they've been discovered with sound before they've managed to put cameras down and find things. And you get a bit of an outline. Maybe they've used some different colours in the output they get there to try and give you something that shows a little bit of a different shape of the outline, but it's still pretty rough and raw in terms of that outline. Take a Phonon Sazer rather than a laser, take a Phonon Sazer, and you're suddenly going to be able to see deep sea exploration with much more accurate imaging. Yeah. So again, someone sat around and went, well, hold on, we do that with light. Why don't we do that with sound waves? Don't be silly, we don't do that. And that kept being developed, and before you know it, someone's saying, we've got the most powerful Phonon Sazer, let's go and see how we can use it. I guarantee we'll use it for a whole range of things we can't even think about now, and they'll get more accuracy. But that's, I suppose, the big thing with this. Whatever you're looking at, whether it be deep sea exploration, medical imaging, whatever you're looking at there, it'll be more accurate because it's a more directed beam of sound rather than a broad sound.
And as far as deep sea exploration goes, we know that we know more about the surface of the moon than we know about underneath the ocean.
That's right.
So, and we're finding new animals all the time living on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
I think it's an exciting field. And,
I'd like
and there's
to find
a lot of
that Malaysia Airlines plane. That'd be interesting to find
that'd
what
be,
that is. That'd be fascinating.
Might
but
answer some questions.
Lots of other stuff as well that you could find. I suppose I don't think I'd use a Phonon Sazer for that because the accuracy would mean you'd be scanning more to try and find it. But once you start finding things, then you can start to look at them more accurately.
Now, if there was ever an ideal use for drones, it has to be in the realms of search and rescue. Helicopters are expensive to run, of course, so there's a limit to just how many can get in the air for a search, for starters, and therefore how many eyes can be scanning the ground. However, a fleet of drones can cover a vast area across a harsh terrain and can dive into zones that a chopper cannot even get within cooey of. And so if we add some AI to the mix, the hit rate cranks up another couple of notches there, Matt.
Absolutely being used in the world as we speak, used for search and rescue, for example. Send some drones out, have some camera obviously there and looking for certain things, certain images that are looking for people typically, and then let AI analyse that because humans, we can't look at the whole screen at the same time. We're looking at this part and this part and this part, and the drone's flying along. It's very difficult for us to look at all of that area, but AI can be searching for specific shapes. And I read one story where this particular gentleman, he passed away, unfortunately. He was lost in some mountainous terrain. They searched for him in the old-fashioned classic way where they had 50 people or so, they joined hands across and they just walked along so they didn't miss anywhere. But it's fairly slow going. You can't do it at night time. You get tough when you start to get to mountainous areas or in snow-covered fields. So it's tough, whereas a drone can do all that. Now, in this particular example, the gentleman passed away. They'd given up looking for him. And then this particular company came along and said, well, we think we've got a solution with this drone. We can go looking for him. Maybe he's still alive out there. Maybe there's a body out there. Within 1 hour, this drone found, unfortunately, his body, but they found this particular person. Now, if this company had been out there as a standard search and rescue solution, maybe when he first went missing, an hour later, might have been found. So they basically do a couple of things. The first thing they do is have a pre-programmed path. So we've lost someone in this area. We're looking for something over here in this area. Up you go on a pre-programmed path, up and back. So you're covering the entire area. You know you're covering the entire area. There's not a little gap in between. There's not like someone says, I'll just duck off and grab something to eat, and there's a little gap in your path of hands being held across the area. You know you're going up and down. Then high resolution cameras on there, so good camera technology, and then that's all being fed back, not on the drone, but being sent back to be analysed externally to just look for those images. And of course, once you find something that might be, you're okay. If you get false positive because let's go and look at that. Let's go and drill in a bit closer, or let's send some people there to look at that. Oh, no, it wasn't what we thought it was, but you've eliminated an area as well. And that's the other part of it. You can eliminate a pretty large area. I think it's somewhere in this big area here. Let's go and send a drone out in this area. This is fairly easy terrain for the drone to see.
Yeah.
But if we get rid of all that, eliminate the obvious. So what was the famous Sherlock Holmes quote? When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Or words to that effect.
Yeah, right. But I'm thinking, if you're able to narrow it down, you can then dive in a bit closer and start diving under craggy cliffs and whatnot and
you could
searching
also,
below.
Yeah, I was also thinking you'd send people. So if we eliminate this big area here, right, it's not any of that area there. Now we can send people into this concentrated area and focus on just this area here and say, right, well, we know that all these other areas are eliminated. So those 50 people, don't use them across this big wide path going there because it could be they're out lost, I'll find a cave, and they get into a cave where the drone can't see them, but humans walking along suddenly can see them. So great use of technology, great use of AI. We want to keep building up AI. We don't want to keep talking it down all the time. But also great use of drones. We're getting better and better with drones. They're getting better battery life, better cameras on them, getting better in what they do all the time, whether it be for used on farmers, for crops, looking for search and rescue, using them for helping police. There's so many different ways you can use drones.
It just makes sense. It's like fit for purpose, yeah?
And all these people out there who said drones are only good for spying on my neighbour, well, there you go. Lots of other uses as well.
They can also rescue people.
That's right.
And so ends another chapter in the story of a world marching forward to a brighter future. Thanks so much for your outstanding narration in our tech talking story time, Matt.
Now, I've just got to go and try and write an algorithm because once we get this quantum computer, surely it can get the lottery numbers for me next week. Surely that climate modelling is difficult, but surely the modelling of what numbers are going to come out in lottery. So that would be a reasonable thing I would have thought, reasonable usage for a quantum computer. I can buy some time on it, so I can go and rent some time, some space. I wouldn't need long. Just tell me lottery numbers for next week and the week after maybe.
And you can shell out so much money because you know you're going to win.
That's right, exactly right.
On a promise. Well, I'm off to see what's hot on my old AM transistor radio and see if I can pick up some swinging dance tunes from 57 maybe. Anyway, thanks for tuning in again, folks. Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson is a tidy little homegrown podcast researched and presented by some of the finest, most curious brains in the country, and that's a fact. It's been tested, I can assure you. I've been your host, James Eddy, and as I sign off now, I'd like to wish you all a productive and creative week. A creatively productive week, shall I say, until we meet again in a week's time. Don't forget to click on the like button, share the link with your friends, wherever you are across the globe, and tune in next week for another cracking tech talk with Matthew Dickerson. See you then.